Welcome to The Longer Game, the only show that's dedicated to the future of retail. We bring on real-life people in the retail industry. We talk about their experiences, we share their stories, we apply it to what's currently going on in the market, and we look towards the future of retail. You could say it's Retail Reimagined. My name is Michael Maher. I run a customized, done-for-you service agency called Cartology that helps brands win on Amazon. Now, while my expertise stems in the Amazon field, we bring on a wide array of guests because retail is expansive. You've got e-commerce. Yes, you've got marketplaces like Amazon. You've also got brick and mortar that is evolving. You've got logistics. You've got technology, finance. There are so many aspects to retail, and it's complicated. So we're here to bring you the entire story. Do you think that you have an interesting story and you'd like to tell it on the podcast? Then go to thelongergame.com and fill out a form to be a guest on the show today. You can catch The Longer Game on any social channels: LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and our website, thelongergame.com. We've got all awesome guests on this show, so that I will promise. Are you ready to hear more about the future of retail? Let's get down to business. Welcome, everybody, to The Longer Game, the podcast where we talk all about retail. We go deep into brick and mortar. We talk about e-commerce. We talk about Amazon, of course. And today on the show, I have with me Sam Hager. He is the co-founder of MixShift. Sam, welcome to the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your incredible hair, and what you do at MixShift?
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate the
super helpful for people out there.
Well, as you know, I was complimentary of your curly hair. I think you always, grass is always greener, right?
Always.
So, yeah, no, thanks for having me on, Michael. I appreciate it. You and I have known each other for a couple of years now. It's a small world in the Amazon space, but we specifically at MixShift, myself and my co-founder Todd Vanderstelt, we had started a couple agencies way back about 8 years ago. MixShift really got its start there, where we were trying to solve our agency problems. Long story short, that started with data provision. Really, can you get off of manual data processes for your agency? So stop pulling reports and everything breaking, and that structure, being dependent on that Excel structure and things like that. Those were kind of the early days before the APIs were really developed out for Amazon and other marketplaces. Very different ecosystem now. We really started focusing on the software aspect of it about 2 years ago, primarily leading with our out-of-the-box reporting solution for Amazon. So a little bit contrarian, but we had spent the last 5 years building custom dashboards and BI tools like Tableau and Power BI and Looker Studio, and on top of that API data for agencies to deliver reporting to their clients. But ultimately still hadn't solved the problem of the maintenance, the master templating, not being able to control the data flow and if there were server errors or whatever within Looker Studio, which I think a lot of people experience. Yep. We just hadn't really solved the pain. Yeah, not fun. I mean, and there's no support on the other side, right?
Support is worse.
It just really hadn't
than Seller
solved.
Central. I think support is worse than Seller Central.
Oh, it's non-existent. Yeah, especially after the Looker acquisition. But I think ultimately, we were just looking at it going, it just really hasn't been solved. We don't want to be a collection of widgets, where you're just putting up data that doesn't actually provide any insight. We really wanted to help agencies do the interpretation of the data, build that story and that narrative for their clients, and also just be the smartest ones in the room by being able to explain hey, performance changed why. And so that really gets into some of our IP with our bridge engine, where we actually can explain contribution to change. Helps us be an oversight layer when you have other tools and other moving parts within your tech stack. So if you're using automation tools, for example, to do bids at scale across a lot of different accounts, it can get a little daunting because it's hard to just keep track of, all those things every day that are happening really fast, especially in high volume days. And so we're able to kind of drill down and say, look, what's the actual impact of all these things that are happening in the account? And then we also focus on the agency operating system aspect of it. Can you see your accounts at scale? Can you do drill downs that help you understand how you're tracking to goals, how your month to date is pacing, what adjustments you need to make? And then we also provide some ad management tools. So when you get that insight from our oversight layers, can you actually go intervene, take action on those insights? And frankly, we kind of talk about it in a way of being agnostic to whatever other tools you're using in your stack to do the actual management of the thing, because we still think there's a real high propensity for being able to manually intervene. Like, hey, and we can talk about this. I think it's an interesting topic, but Amazon's coming out with its own automation tools now, so you've got this kind of interesting time in the Amazon space specifically where third-party tools are starting to pivot because Amazon has some of that same automation. All the while, Amazon's starting to change the actions that agencies are taking on behalf of their brands, or the brands are taking, within the Amazon ad console and abroad, because now it's more about setting up that structure, that strategy, the targeting, the creative, and less about actually pulling levers on bids and budgets, because you can set rules to do that. So whether you're doing that in a third party or you're doing that in Amazon, our opinion and our perspective, and I think something that holds true for a very long time, is that those systems are never built with your incentives in mind. Meaning, they might be closely aligned, but they're never going to be perfect to the goal that you're trying to achieve. So it's really important to monitor those actions relative to the objectives that you're trying to achieve. Like, you may be trying to grow awareness in one set of campaigns and hit profitability in another. And with another, you're actually just doing some kind of testing that has no place for automation at all, right? And so it's really, we're trying to capture that context of what you're trying to achieve as a brand or on behalf of that brand as an agency, and actually tell you relatively, like, okay, all these things happened. What was the impact? How did that relate to what you were trying to achieve? And ultimately, did we get there? Did we achieve the thing we were looking to set out to do? And our reporting and analytics are really presented through that lens. And so that's kind of where we fit. We have some cool things in the works that, we'll talk about maybe in 2025, but I would love to talk, a little bit about that, and just what brands should expect for 2025 as we're moving into a new year.
I am salivating right now because you've got so much meat on this bone of this stuff that you're talking about. And I'm like, yes. I want to talk about all those things. Here are the main themes that I'm hearing. One is, what is impact of actions you're taking, which I think is super important. Another is the direction of Amazon. And really, I heard Chad Rubin say before, Amazon's great at showing you what you make, but not what you keep. I think that's part of what we're talking about from some of their tools that they use or that they've created. I think another thing is the direction that a lot of SaaS companies are going, which is reporting. But is the reporting purposeful and intentional, or is it, hey, here's all this stuff that we should show you, which leads me into data, which is there's so much data. There's so much data to look at. What's really important? And I think if I think it really all comes back to what is mission, or what are core values for you. My agency Cartology runs on an EOS framework, so core values are very important. And I love that because when we got clear on core values, it was a lot easier to set targets to determine who was a right butt in the right seat and who was not. So I think if people would be intentional about saying, why are we using automation? Why do we need this kind of reporting? Then they would probably get to a better answer. But it seems like everyone is just raced to be the first to market on stuff. And while I do think you should be first to market on certain things with your kids, I want to talk about sex with your kids before anybody else does. You don't want their stupid friends telling you them stuff, because they surely don't know.
Yeah. Be the seed,
right? Yeah,
least,
but there's so much data out there. Like, where do you even start to break down what you should be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I think after coming out of Accelerate and then Unboxed, this year in 2024, I think it was really easy to feel overwhelmed simply from just like the sheer volume of releases that we were discussing, right? A lot of it was around new data and automation and AMC in particular, which we'll get into AMC a little bit. And, after we came out of Accelerate, I think we kind of took a step back and said, okay, all these things that are coming out, what's still holds true for us, as a software, but also as practitioners in the space, who consult brands and have our own brands. And
Yeah, you guys have
we,
done the work, which is the whole reason why MixShift exists. It's because you needed to solve a problem that no one else was really solving. And so, but you've
yeah.
got the work.
And I hope we're still doing that. Yeah. And I mean, I think we still are. We took a step back and wrote kind of a manifesto of like what we believe, not so dissimilar from some of the core values that come out of EOS, right? And really some of those themes were, look, yeah, there's a lot of data coming, but I think with complexity breeds opportunity, right? And there's always going to be a need for expertise in these deep areas of the data where you're going, well, great, I have more data to use now. And for a lot of brands, they're like, I don't even use the data that was there
Right,
in the
right.
first place, right? And so, it becomes a prioritization and a focus exercise. And I think for 2025, as brands are heading into their annual operating planning, and doing their strategy and planning for the next year, I think it becomes a question of like, how do we view Amazon as a platform? For a long time, there was a sentiment that was like, hey, I don't want to give my customers over, handily to Amazon, right? This is a construct that we deal with a lot as an agency, as we're talking to brands, especially those that are reluctant to really embrace the platform. I think by and large, that sentiment has really dissolved,
Oh, for
over the
100%. I
last
used to
couple
go
of
to
years.
trade shows
Yeah.
and they would say, well, where do you sell? And I'm like, well, I have a physical footprint. It was my house. But I also sell on
Yeah.
marketplaces on my website. Would you sell on Amazon? Oh, we don't want to be on Amazon. I mean, that was like people were pushing you
Yeah.
away. And now I feel like it may really even be the opposite. How do we, if you're not already on Amazon, how do we get on and embrace that?
Well, and I think the full circle moment is like now you can upload your 1P data into Amazon and create a true customer map across all of your properties, right? Now that sounds a little scary for some who are still kind of on that fence of like, man, Amazon's going to know everything about my business. But ultimately, I think you just have to look at the direction Amazon is going, which is they're putting buy with Prime in TikTok and PayPal and all these other places where I think you're going to have way more benefit and advantage from having this integration and a better picture across your channels than you will really trying to continue to segment the thing and keep
I
it
mean, that's what
isolated and on its island.
omni-channel is. Multi-channel is we just sell in all these spots. Omni-channel is,
Mhm.
and I think the end game here, other than death, is what is our actual customer journey? And if you could measure, it's very, very difficult to do. There's a great report that a company called Analytics Partners put out. It's called ROI Genome. Really great. Talked about the relationship between Amazon and off Amazon sales. And something like 49% of display ads, they said, were had sales attributed off Amazon. 23% or 29% of sales from search happened off or had attributed sales off Amazon. But if you could say, my customer went into the store, looked me up on Amazon, and then they ultimately bought on my direct to consumer site, that provides a lot more. I mean, I think there's a lot of brands that have already leaned into that, but I feel like that's the ultimate end game.
Yeah, it's the event level interactions, right? That where we're actually have these touch points. Obviously you have to get to an aggregation threshold, which is a term that's specific to AMC, but ultimately you now have this capability. In fact, Amazon in their partner newsletter just announced the data manager interface, which is the ability to actually I think it's called data manager. They're all so generic at this point. It's hard to actually differentiate a lot of them, but you can actually do a manual upload of your 1P data now. So you don't even require a developer to integrate with the APIs. They have some integrations with some common like CRMs or CDP platforms. So if you have your customer data elsewhere, like there are some direct integrations, but you can also do it manually. I think this just opens the door for everybody to take advantage of it. I do think though that to the point of like just getting first principles down and kind of checking the base boxes of like, are you doing all the right things to set Amazon up for success? Like this is one of those things that definitely falls today into like an advanced tactic bucket, right? Because unless you really do have tracking across these other channels and you have an incentive to understand that customer across many, like let's just get, first
But
principles
starting
right
there
first.
means you miss all the stuff that actually builds the foundation. So let's talk about first principles in general. Correct me if I'm wrong. Just first principles means not Amazon specific. What are the like core things that I have to do and everything else kind of falls under that? Like what is my foundation? For
Yeah.
Amazon,
Yeah. I
oh go
mean,
ahead. Go ahead.
no, you've heard it from a couple different people. Elon Musk is usually the one that gets credited with talking about first principles in the sense that he likes to break down complex systems into the very fundamental things that matter for that system. So in the Amazon regard, I think a paradigm that was hard for brands and agencies really to just grasp early on was this element of the interaction between retail and advertising, right? Where retail impacted advertising and advertising was inherently impacting and linked to retail. And this created an entire new category of agencies and knowledge sets where you had to kind of understand like operations in order to be successful on
And there
the
was no
advertising
metric. There
side.
was no metric. It had to be created by people outside of Amazon. You still can't measure that inside of Amazon.
No, but I mean, quite literally, tacos was
Right.
one of those
Exactly.
metrics that got created to represent the interaction between your advertising and your retail performance, right? And that never really played when you got an ad on Google and you got a conversion. It didn't improve your
Nope. Some people
SEO,
claimed it
right?
did,
But
but yeah, there was really no tie.
I mean, it may had some relationship, but we were very clearly dealing with a new paradigm. And I think that's a first principle. Okay, you have to have inventory in order to sell. Oh, interesting. Okay, that is like a fundamental thing. You have to have the inventory. And then you have to own the buy box. Okay, there's another first principle, right? And then you have to get conversions on certain keywords in order to be visible in the organic search result. So there you have kind of the fundamental tenets of Amazon, right? And this sounds very simple, but I think once you start to break them down into the principal games, now you can start to build some of these more complex strategies on top of this, which says like, look, if I'm not operationally excellent, like I'm never going to be
And
successful.
even
That's
big
kind of
brands
point number one.
today struggle with that. How much do we forecast? How much should we bring in going into a tentpole event like Prime Day, Prime Big Deal Days, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Turkey 11, whatever you want to call it? How how much inventory will we have afterwards? I mean, that's still a challenge for people.
Yeah, and I think it's a task for the agency to be a good steward of this on behalf of the brands that
Yeah.
they work with, right? Because you may not be incentivized on, let's say you don't have a percent of OPS, ordered product sales. Maybe your contract structure, maybe you have a flat fee, but you still can't win on behalf of that brand if they don't succeed operationally, right? So you have this dynamic where you kind of have to be watching it. You kind of have to be aware of like, do we have good weeks of cover? Like, do we have ample coverage? And how involved do I get in that forecasting process as we're going into an annual or quarterly planning, right, with this brand? And these are some of the things we think about a lot from an agency operating system standpoint. Can we give you these things to help make it visible for the client, help you take action on it, or at least make them aware of it before it becomes a problem for you? And then on the other side of that is like, okay, you guys maybe didn't hold up your end of the bargain or like something happened in the supply chain or whatever. Now we need to be able to understand what was the level of that impact. We have to be able to explain like, okay, we missed goal by 20%, but actually we would have missed by 30% if we hadn't done all these things to offset the inventory outage, for example, right? So we're not talking subjectively now about, I feel like we had a bad month. It's like, well, I can tell you exactly where the bad month came from. And actually it wasn't as bad as it looked because we can actually relatively calculate, what was the impact of that out of stock? What does that mean for us, across these lines, and which ASINs were actually responsible for the thing, and that's some of what we help our agencies
There
do.
there is a shift, I believe, that's coming on Amazon. Bingo.
Bingo.
That and we've talked about this, and I think you're right. And it's funny because this shift is already calculable. Okay. I don't say that word very often, but I got it. it is calculable right now, but a lot of people are not looking at it. And something that has been looked at before has been share of voice. A lot of softwares measure that. And organic rank or organic placement, I think, is important. And everybody talks about organic rank, but not a lot of people talk about how to get there from a really basic level. And like here, I think it's funny because I could give you my entire playbook as an agency, and I'm okay with that. Maybe not every single thing, but I could give you everything. Go ahead and try and replicate it and have the gumption to put it all
Mm-hmm.
together into a team. Take the time, take the financial capability to do that. Like, you really want to copy what I have? You can't copy what I have. Someone said that in a movie,
Yeah, but it won't change their behavior. Yeah, like
but that was in a movie, wasn't it?
there's some folks that talk about this, but
You
what's that?
want to copy what I have? You can't copy what I have. That was in a movie. I can't remember what, but yeah, they are now just copying, and they don't have the intent and purpose behind what you were originally trying to do. But from a basic level, how do you rank? Pick a product you want to rank, have it align,
Mm-hmm.
look at other products on this keyword that you want to rank on. So pick a
Mm-hmm.
product and a keyword. First, pick the keyword, has to be relevant to your product. Determine the product you want to sell, and look at alignment across the category from a price perspective. If you're trying to rank on
Mm-hmm.
a term that on average has a $10 price point and your product's 100, it's going to be really challenging. Not impossible, but really challenging.
Yeah.
Then set up a campaign that is sponsored products keyword targeting with that term and that term only. Make it exact match. Set up the campaign, start bidding, start generating impressions, and you're going to really have to overbid. If Amazon suggests $1.50, I'd go as high as $5 to start generating impressions, start building up capability. If you can bring it down, great. And then start to measure not your return on ad spend. I think that's a metric you should be looking at. If you're constantly, at 0.25 or 0.5, like, is it worth it to me? That's what that ROAS number tells me. But then
Mm-hmm.
look at top of search impressions. Look at where you're showing up organically. That's the base level. And I don't think anybody's saying that's how to do it. Like, that's not a secret tactic. That's just how you set up a rank campaign. I think it's pretty basic. What you want to do
Yeah.
beyond that is fine, but that is a base level thing that you need to do in order to actually show up organically. But share of voice, all that does is measure where you show up in search. I think there's something else that's more important and really is where the shift is going, and it's something that we've talked about.
Yeah, do you want to
Do you
touch
want to
on that? Do
touch
you
on
want to
it?
get into like this? Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you. I think the follow up is like, okay, I run this test, I invest in this keyword. How do you actually measure whether or not it was effective?
You could measure
How do you do that today?
organic rank, and that would show you where you're showing up in search results for that IP address. And yes, you could go to 100 different IP addresses and do that. And I do think it's a good proxy for, did we see movement? Because if you were at 300 and now you're number one, I do think that makes a lot of sense. So again, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I think looking at how much, no one talks about market share. How much of the, except big brands talk about it. Native brands on Amazon, DTC brands, I don't know that they're talking about market share as much. How much of the market do you own? And you can calculate that by using SQP data.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Todd talked about this quite a long time ago when he put out just a very basic search query performance analysis template that made it easy to filter out noise. Because one of the things that happens, especially as we go into the holidays, is like you're going to get indexed for different terms every time you pull that SQP report, week over week. So you get your 100 terms per ASIN or whatever that you rank for. One thing we pay attention to are the ins and outs. What things were on there last week or last month, but aren't on there this month, and vice versa. What stuff showed up for the first time and wasn't there before? This is kind of where that bridging concept also helps, because you can say, okay, what were the in and out? What were the consistent ones? Like, and what was the relative volume gain or share there, or potentially purchase share change, right, on that set? And then there's the set that you lost and the set that you gained. And what you're really trying to determine is like, net, am I better off than I was? last month. Now, specifically to like the single term or the ranking, to your point, I think this is something we've talked about a lot, is I really believe that the concept of organic rank and being able to rely on a specific ranking number as a measurement of your capture is, those days are very, very numbered. And it's primarily driven
We should some
by
cool sound
what I think
effects
is
for
going to
that,
be
like ooh,
right.
because I
Yeah.
can hear
Yeah.
people.
I don't think it's like a
No,
doom.
it's
I don't think
not.
it's a dooming sound. I think it's like a, oh,
It's a shock to
interesting,
the system.
exciting, because yeah, but I think in a lot of ways we're going to have a pretty big reset, because the AI based search says, "Hey, I don't care so much what keyword you're searching for. I care much more who you are as a
What's the
customer
product
profile
relevancy
or as
to
a
you? What's
persona.
your intent behind that? And
What's your
there's science
history?"
articles, Amazon science articles that talk about, subjective search
Yeah,
intent and what they actually
yeah,
leverage. And I think there's still more to
yeah,
be cracked there, but there's some smart people that are already doing work on
yeah.
that.
Meaning, and I think for brands, what this breaks down to is like your search results, Michael, when you search, are going to look a lot different than mine. Now, they'll probably be within the same category and you're going to see a lot of crossover and all those things. But I think the idea that a rank as a measure is just really going to be of a bit of a moot point longer term, because that's not the true measure of how successful you're going to be. And I think it's just going to be widely varied depending on, like you said, which IP you're using, and you can't possibly mimic the activity of the millions of customers that,
It's a lot of
visit
data to
Amazon
hold on
each
to
day.
too, to have to do all that and scrape that and then come back and do it.
Yeah.
Again, it's a good proxy, but is that
Yeah.
really, are you
Well, it was. I don't know that it is anymore. I think this is why SQP data becomes so important. I mean, Amazon's literally telling you that this is the source, like this is the source of truth, right? And we actually talked to the guy that built the SQP data. He was a product manager that left Amazon. I won't
you can
disclose
give me his
anything
number
super
later.
proprietary or anything. But he definitely looked at the other rank tracking softwares that were out there and said, "Well, I can do better than that." Right. And this is no diss on
Sure.
those platforms out there, because I
They
think
served a great
they've done this
purpose.
space a huge service. I mean, this was stuff Amazon was keeping behind closed doors for a very long time. They were the only ones that could get us some semblance of like, how are we doing? Now, I think a lot of those firms will pivot, in some different
Where are
ways,
they going to
including the
pivot to?
incorporation of SQP. I mean, they'll start to the point of like the market share, the share of voice, category share, things like that. It's the same principle. You're just going to primarily use different data to build that
I think
picture.
organic rank can be helpful
And they
in the
have,
beginning. If you are not ranking anywhere and you start a rank campaign and you start to see yourself show up, I think that's saying, okay, we're kind of on to something. And it's an easier, faster way than having to go to do SQP. But I think, right, do I show up at all? And a lot of people still search themselves and like, oh, I'm not showing up. I'm seeing other brands. And I'm like, that's cool
yeah,
to look at, but it's not going to be reliable.
that's because you never buy your own product when you search,
Yeah. Or you do buy it, you've bought it,
right?
and just do a
You have a
test
high
buy.
bounce rate on your own product,
and and
right?
then it's like you've purchased this before, so it shows up. Well, of course it's going to show up. I've had that happen to me before. But share of purchases is, I think, way, to your point, more important. And here's what I like to pose to people is like a does this matter statement. If you and I think just being honest about this question, if you are ranked 48 on a desktop search, so you're the bottom organic search, and you own 50% of purchases, do you care where you're showing up organically? I think the answer is no, but I don't think most people ask themselves that question. They just think Holy Grail is number one.
And I think, and there is still validity in that statement, right? I still want the bestseller
Sure.
badge or the overall pick or whatever, right? Like I still
What if you
want those
had
badges and I
bestseller
still
badge,
want to
but you
be
were in number 48 and you had 50% of purchases? Do you still care about being number one?
sure. And this is where, just to make the point, I think organic rank will still be a data point in that picture. I just don't think it's the end all be all anymore. I think it's one of a number of different data points that these companies, like the Jungle Scouts of the world, are going to use in order to kind of approximate what is share. Like what does that mean for us now?
I mean, we're seeing
But
keyword
yeah, to the
trackers
point, like
already start to use. SQP data to get to approximate search volumes on like a weekly or monthly basis, which I do
Yeah.
think is a smart thing to do to pivot in that way. I also just think it's going to be
Yeah.
hard. I think these tools will still need to be there in some capacity, maybe not all, because who wants to go and pull a bunch of SQP data?
Well, no, and I think the aggregation is difficult. Like, I don't think that's a simple task. Like, there's also like BSR data implicated and potentially the affiliate marketing AP, like a bunch of other things that are like, there's a real service that those companies are doing and bringing that. And I think you can also enrich it with like panel data, if you're getting big enough where you're like bringing in actual panel insights of like how they search and where your product relates for them. And so, yeah, there's a much bigger data picture there of the question. Total random aside, but kind of related. I for the first time today saw a Rufus query in my search term data for advertising. So I've converted a sponsored ad on a Rufus query
Wow.
that
When
Rufus
Amazon
sponsored
has said
placement.
we're not we're not going to show you that data, but it sounds like it is showing up.
I don't know how it couldn't
Yeah.
be because it was literally a
Yeah.
question that was canned in Rufus. So I feel like they're attaching that as the search term context, which is pretty cool. But it relates to this idea of like, look, that's how search is changing. The question that they asked was about a feature of the product. It wasn't like hey, I'm looking for it's not water bottle. It was like, how does the double insulated vacuum wall prevent heat loss, kind of thing. Like, and it was very clearly like a generated question. But this is kind of the point where we may be coming to Amazon as a more of a contextual and qualitative search where you're doing more of a prompt. I think there's always going to be that conversion based search where you're just looking for a product. I mean, the entire Amazon user base has been trained like that for the last 20 years, so that's not going to change overnight or anything. I just think as a means of information discovery and research, like it's only getting better. And this is where some of the storefront and A plus content becomes really critical, so that you're providing this context to Rufus and to the AI search, right? For brands, fundamentally, another first principle is like, make sure you fill out all the metadata fields for the product as Amazon wants them, because guess what? Like,
Rufus
I
can't
think a lot of the
answer.
copywriting I think a lot of the copywriting and the creativity, unfortunately, I think there's still going to be a lot of opportunities for creativity in listings. I just tend to think Amazon is going to take more and more control over the listings away and rather funnel us to filling out metadata that relates to the product so it can properly categorize and structure that product for their
And for
learning,
search
you
results
know,
too, is that where you're going with this?
100%,
And I think
100%.
bullet points are honestly irrelevant, except for if you want to have a keyword in there. I think I haven't done this on a client because I don't think they would want me to, but I would remove bullet points intentionally, let PDP assets be up there, and really
Mhm.
sell in the PDP assets. I think you would be fine from a conversion standpoint because
Yeah,
mobile is
I
where most people
couldn't
shop
agree.
anyway. You have to get sometimes below the well, first your PDP images show up first, then the PDP image gallery, then sometimes it's bullet points, sometimes it's A plus content,
Yeah,
then bullet points.
yeah.
That's Amazon, I feel like, deprioritizing that. And I just don't think it's as relevant, especially if you look at shareholder letter to shareholder data from a couple years ago. Andy Jassy said 50% of people purchase in 15 minutes or less. 28% purchase in 3 minutes or less. You think they're spending time
Yeah.
5 minutes to read your bullet points? I don't think so.
No, but a counter to that is what happens when you start to build your own microsite on Amazon, right? So storefronts are basically microsites at this point, and so a lot of that traffic that you're bringing from external, especially into Amazon, and sponsored TV and DSP and some of these other things, a lot of those sponsored brands, case in point, like that directs to your storefront. Why? Like, I think you're going to see a lot of more structured information and the ability to educate customers. So you might see that dwell time
Hmm.
increase over time. I've always thought, like, kind of a tangent as well, but I haven't I'm surprised that more people haven't used like the bullet points in the PDP pages to like bury Easter eggs or be
Yeah,
funny.
I love
For
that
so
idea.
long, like I think like giveaways and things like that could be triggered. Like you got to find the code word in the bullet point over this week or whatever. Like there's these different things that you can play with the content. I'm just kind of surprised more people don't do it because we've been so ingrained, we've been so trained to make sure we're doing all the right SEO things, kind of to the point of the tips and tricks and like these advanced tactics. Look, some of the top selling products on Amazon, their PDP,
They
their detail
suck.
pages look awful. Awful. So this tells you a couple of things. One, brand presence still matters. I mean, massively. Like I think gone are the days, like there are still some niche opportunities where you can kind of like arbitrage in and white label a product. But generally speaking, this is kind of to the point of what we started the conversation about, which is Amazon's become a brand building platform. And they're telling you this for with all of the data that you're giving you, as well as what they're willing to ingest to help you create this picture. And I think it's going to be really, really hard to compete if you do not build some kind of organic and brand presence outside of Amazon. Now, I still think you can do that. And I think it's going to become more and more possible to do that natively on Amazon. Like if you were just a brand launching for the first time, could you start on Amazon and grow a brand? I think the
Yeah.
answer is yes.
It's just not
I
the way
just
it
tend to
was
think
7,
those
8, 10 years ago where you pick a product, launch
right.
it, it's okay. You can instantly make revenue and profitability. And
Well, the ability to compete on price is very, very
I think China's
difficult
pretty much got that
today.
on
And
lock. You're never going to be able to.
well, Amazon's doing its $20 or less platform. I don't even remember what it's called now. It's Temu competitor, right? Like it's Shein competitor where they have certain products and categories like that's the race to the bottom right
Yeah.
there. Like Jason Pennies and you're going to do volume and you don't require a brand. It's purely like a price based purchase. That means that what's left on Amazon and what, the brands that are really going to thrive are those that you can launch a new product, but you still need to be differentiated
I agree
somehow,
with that,
some
but
way.
Amazon also said in one of their letters to shareholders recently, after quarterly earnings came out. Sorry, not it wasn't a letter to shareholders. It was just quarterly earnings that Amazon's revenue was up, and so were unit sales, but AOV was down. So I'm wondering.
Mhm.
So they're actually going in. To your point, they're going about building a brand. They're going in the wrong direction. Maybe that Temu competitor is where they want to shift those brands. And a lot of people complain about Amazon's fees. They're all Amazon first brands. If you look at any retail first brand and then talk to them about getting on Amazon and what that's been like, they are so excited. Why are they excited? Because they get nickel and dimed on everything when they go into a retail store. You don't just get put on the shelves. You have first
Placement
a
fees
slotting
and
fee. You
merchandising
have a
fees
merchandising fee.
and
You have
yeah.
chargebacks. You have to pay for the promotions. You have to pay for the in store marketing that's there. All these things happen, and people are like, "Oh, we can get on Amazon and make a referral fee and shipping, and then we're good." Yes, Amazon has some of those things, but people just complain about that. Not that it doesn't feel bad, but Amazon is becoming more of a traditional retailer instead of just a hop on and sell your stuff.
They're a victim of their own success too, and I think to your point, it's a really prescient one, which is the ones that started on Amazon and were Amazon first brands always and never really built brand presence or any kind of equity outside of Amazon are the same ones that are kind of really hurting with the fees, right?
They
Because
have no brand equity.
they built well, but they also built a business on the cash flow and margins that were that they were experiencing for those first 5, 10 years. And now, as that margin starts to erode a little bit, you have to change your entire cash flow planning. You have to change your supply chain, your cycles, your inventory turns, everything. And a lot of those brands are not operationally excellent, and they're not diversified from a product standpoint or a channel standpoint, and you just a lot of the risk is inherent to them being solely dependent on Amazon as their sales channel, right? So yeah, I think there's a way to help mitigate and de-risk it. But that mostly comes by having other places to sell product and having a presence where people are finding you without you having to pay to for them to find you, right? And that's always nice, especially as an agency. I'm sure you see some of the brands, like the clients that come to you, if they have a little bit of presence outside of Amazon, you're like, oh, thank
Well,
goodness,
it's a
you know,
huge help
right?
because yes, they're already known, but even beyond that, what a lot of lazy people will do is just rely upon that brand strength. Then you don't get
Mm,
market share. So what you can do is leverage that brand visibility, turn it into increased market share by actually getting into the category, going after the terms, after the competitors, doing the discovery,
yep,
retargeting, doing all the strategies that you need to do to build better brand presence, and then you can dominate, and then you're everywhere. Add on DSP,
yep.
you can start retargeting people or going after audiences who would not even expect to necessarily see on Amazon, or maybe been on Amazon and don't see you. That to me is incredible. So it's a incredible starting point versus, okay, no one knows what your product is. It's a great product. Nobody knows your brand.
Yeah.
You're going to have to continue to build and be unprofitable until you get better brand recognition. So I 100% agree that there has to be some kind of brand awareness, and to me, or brand equity. Like, I know who this brand is. I want to buy more of their stuff. That's like a simple way of talking about brand equity. Are people wanting to
Mhm.
invest more in your product?
Yeah, 100%. And do you have something, to the point of AOV? Like, do you have something that they can then move to? Like, if you're a one and done type of brand, like, and you haven't diversified your product line, and like, I think the brands that I've seen most successful are the ones that continue to innovate
Yeah, new
product,
product, new
right? Like,
lines, maybe they deprecate something old, they come out with a new version, they come out with updated features. They're not waiting for someone to say we want this. They're just saying we're going to continue to iterate. That's in our DNA. And a lot of Amazon brands have been, here's my product. It's great. The margins are good. I'm going to ride it out until Amazon says otherwise.
or competition
Sure.
says otherwise. I think, for those that got in the game early and kind of built the moat around reviews and were, early in a niche category, like, life was really good until money started entering, right? Brands started getting acquired by big operators like the aggregators in our space. Brands started getting more sophisticated, right? And it was harder and harder to compete. I think about the water bottle sector a lot because or category a lot because I've had clients in that space. You know, 5 years ago, Hydro Flask was kind of king, and everybody was kind of trying to figure out how to replicate their success, right? And it was kind of one style bottle. Now you've got like five very distinct types of bottles, and they've
Simple Modern,
fragmented the
Yeti,
entire
Stanley,
category.
those are all great examples of brands.
But it's also the
Yeah,
style, right? Like, people are now searching for different styles because Awalas of the world and the Simple Moderns of the world have created and innovated. So now you've fragmented that niche, that category, where it's harder to get share. It's harder to have velocity, and that there's major money entering into those categories, right? It hit its maturity curve where, like, it's a very mature category, and I think that's just generally true. So for brands that are, looking at Amazon, I think I would just say don't despair, right? Like, never before has there been as much information to be able to find your strategy. But I think as people are heading into annual planning, like, it's really a question of, what do you want the Amazon channel to be? What do you want to achieve this year? And really building strategy backward from that. Because, too often I think you get into the year, you have like a very basic growth multiple. Okay, we want to grow 20%. What does that
why?
actually mean? Well, how much do you have? Why do you want to grow? How much do you need to invest to hit that growth? Does that include like equal and consistent profit margin growth along that same curve, or are you willing to give up some margin to get to that share? Like, what are we talking about here? Those are some of, like, just the strategic questions. I think as agencies, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this too. But, like, how involved do you get in that strategy conversation? Because it has big implications for you as the agency operator. That's like, okay, well, I've been given no more budget, but have a 20%
If you
growth
stay out of
increase
it,
requirement.
it's easy to do, but if you stay out of it, you don't have a say or input and you can't influence. And ultimately, if you're
Yep.
doing the right thing for the brands, you should be able to influence them in the right way. And getting involved requires more work and effort. But I think a lot of agencies are order takers. Yeah, we know Amazon really well. Okay, how much do you want to spend? Cool. And what's your ROAS target? Cool. We're going to go do that. Why? Why?
Oh, and by the way, we're going to force it into tolerance and we're going to rely on your brand presence. And we're really not going to grow anything for you or
But
acquire new
we've taken the
customers. And so
order,
six,
served up hot and
in
fresh.
about 6
You're right.
months, you're going to come asking why growth is going the
You
wrong
have
way.
to, as an agency, you have to push back, not to the point of pissing someone off. Maybe sometimes it might, but what, who, what, when, where, how, and why? What do you want to do? I want to grow. Why do you want to grow? Because I want to sell this company. Great. Now we at least know why you're in to do this. Because I want to build a lifestyle
Right.
brand. Great. Two very different whys behind the growth, two very different plans.
Yeah.
Okay, how are you going to do that? And how long is it going to take you to do that? And then
Well, and this is your EOS training, right?
who is your
Kicking in,
team?
where you're like,
Who's your team
really,
that's going to help you to do
yeah,
that? I think you stay out though. You don't get a say, and then you become an order taker. It's really easy to do, and you can have smart people become order takers. Nobody wants to push back, but I would rather push back and make a brand feel a little uncomfortable and say, look, this right here is telling us to do this. I can make this change that you're asking us to do. Here is what's going to happen. And I hammer that
yep.
home over and over and over again.
And we can measure the impact of that change, by the way, with
MixShift.
correct.
So, but we can
Yeah.
go back and then say,
No.
not I told you so, but okay, what did we say was going to happen? Did it happen? Yes.
Well, it removes the
Yes.
subjectivity. We're not talking about, okay, well, here was the strategy. We employed that. Here was the impact that had. Here's the margin points that we lost, but here's the revenue points that we gained, and here's where it
Yep.
occurred.
And now
we're talking like, was it successful by our standards, by the objectives that we define
ahead of time, not
know?
after, because then it can become subjective, but 100%.
What are our KPIs?
And now, is it true that you're creating MixShift for marriages?
For marriages,
well, who changed?
no,
Who
Todd
changed
and
what? And who contributed more or less?
Todd and I are way too smart to get
I
into
think
that
I
business
think that's
because
very
we
wise.
are,
Yeah,
still married and want to remain that
that's
way.
a great point. Funny
Yeah.
show concept though.
But no,
Like according to my margins, you
yeah,
contributed 10 bips to depleting our savings, and I was only 3. But when I
lot of qualitative context to
Yeah,
capture
yeah.
there, I think, to be accurate. But to that point, I think like the best agencies that we work with, who are our primary customers at MixShift, are those that do get involved in that planning process. And I think as an AI and automation become a bigger part of our tech stack, the brands are left questioning, well, what do I need the agency for sometimes? And I know you've pondered this question a lot, but two big points there, which we've touched on in a couple different ways. One, there's a lot of complexity and you need an expert, right? Nobody has the time to be the expert in all things, which is why you hire an agency, is to be that subject matter expert. But secondly, I think the value prop of an agency starts to shift a little bit, where it's like, I'm not necessarily pulling all the levers because we've got AI to do that. But what I will tell you is that I know what to set up and structure in order to achieve the thing we just agreed on.
So that it can pull the when and by how much, and because we want to drive a certain amount of change.
And really doing a sanity test on whether or not we can achieve those things based on the budget you've given us and the goals you've provided and what we've outlined and what we've seen as past historical performance. Like, this is the job of the agency, is to be that steward, on those platforms, and then be able to tell you like, hey, we tried this thing. Here were the results. Was it good enough? Like, did it hit what we were trying to achieve? And that's where we really focus, is just like, how are you achieving what we set out to do versus what we think is good, right? It's hard. It's easy to say, well, we hit our goal. Well, if you hit the goal by just pumping a bunch of brand spend, and which Amazon loves to do, by the way, sneak in your brand terms everywhere, right? You can say, yeah, that was the goal. But like, if it doesn't translate into the actual outcomes for the client, which may be acquiring new customers, increasing category share, doing some of these other things, really, like, the point is kind of moot because you didn't actually hit what you were trying to achieve. And so I think that buy-in up front, doing that strategic planning with your clients and brands, you should be doing this with your agencies too. Because if you're not all in agreement of what's possible and what is achievable, somewhere down the road, there's gonna be a lot of finger pointing that goes like, hey, we're not there. Why? And that really comes with good reporting, good oversight, understanding what was driving those things and being able to have an objective
I
conversation
was going to say
about
there has
that,
to be a level
not
of
a subjective
transparency.
one.
There has to be a level of, hey, we're going to contribute stuff. We might disagree, but at the end of the day, we're here to serve your brand well, and that requires
Yeah.
some honesty and some trust.
And your agency shouldn't be scared to
No,
get into those questions of the data, right? If they're hiding data from you or they're not willing to go like open the hood and like really dig in, like it's kind of
I
a red
think
flag,
I think
truthfully.
you should always allow access to data for someone. What you choose to present, I think, is also important. So I could show you all the data.
Yep.
Is it really relevant to you? Well, let's focus on these things. And if you want to see more, great. Let's dig
Yep.
in and let's talk about it. Yeah, you should not be hiding anything.
Yep.
I also think there can be a data overwhelm. So like intentional data that you want to show people, but
Yep.
also I think you should be able to go to a client and say, look, we tried this thing that we wanted to do. It was not as successful as we wanted. You shouldn't have egg on your face. It's just we didn't know until we tested. So it looks like a quote unquote failure. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to adjust this spend here. We're going to put this in here. And here's how we get to the next place that we want to be.
Perfect point. And to the point, like differing levels of granularity for different clients. Like people want different stuff, right? And it's not so much like we focus on that a lot. Like we don't want to end up creating more questions or problems than the
Right.
agency wants to interact with, right? Like that's not, we've been very intentional about that in our reporting, being able to roll up and lock it down and do some different things to prevent that. What I more so mean is like when we have a miss or a hit, if we have the miss, we're not talking about, oh, it's because of this and this. It's like, no, we can actually just point at the data and go, here's where the miss happened. What do we think about this? Right. Well, the out of stock caused us to miss by 20 points, but there was another thing here that actually like this ASIN, this repricing decreased conversion rate by 10%, which led to an ACOS increase of 3 points. Well, are we okay with that? Yes or no? If we are, then the discussion's done, right? But if we're not, we're like, okay, then we need to make some changes and we need to start measuring this. And like, this is the beauty of like the explain layer that we're talking about and what we talk about with our reporting is like, it moves that conversation from subjectivity of like pointing fingers, like what happened when we have a miss or when we have a hit, and rather points at the data and goes, okay, well, here's what the data is telling us. What's the plan from
Yeah.
here?
And then you're at the conversation, you're at the table with people in a conversation. It's like, all right, we're all looking at this together. We're a team. How to figure this out? Great, let's go and do it. And then, like you said, it removes the
Yep.
finger pointing. Of course, it depends
Yeah.
upon the
Builds a
quality of
lot
the
of
person
trust.
too. But this has been the super great conversation. This has been the super great conversation. That's a terrible sentence, but I've so enjoyed talking with you and just talking about. I mean, this reminds me of the conversation we had at Accelerate. But if people want to know more about what
Yeah.
Sam Hager's doing, where should they go? Is he going to be clean and shift up in the backyard, or what's going to be? Where should they go to look for you?
Yeah, if you really want it, because shift does happen, but you should
Right,
know
you
why,
should
right?
know
Like,
why.
so you can check out mixshift.io. We're always here for you guys. Hit me at, I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, all the spots, but hit us up at mixshift.io. Happy to chat. I mean, we really exist just to help agencies achieve excellence. That's really where we're heading and the tools that we build. But we're practitioners ourselves, so we're really close to the problem. We try to stay close and just solve real problems for real
Love
people.
it. Well, appreciate you coming on. Thanks everyone for listening.
All right.
We don't have anything else on the show, so that's it. You got to go. Listen to other episodes, but this one's over. Peace out. All right, that was the show. What did you think? That was the longer game. We would love for you to share the show with other people and to leave us a review of the show. So go to iTunes, go to Spotify, you can go to YouTube, comment, leave a review, and share this on any social channels that you are active on and wherever you have influence. We want to share this story and stories like it to as many people as possible. Do you have a compelling story and do you want to come on the podcast and talk about it and you're in the retail industry? Then go to thelongergame.com, fill out a form, and we will contact you about coming on the show. You can find us on any social channels, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and you can go to our website, thelongergame.com, to actually read all of these episodes in blog form in text, because we know not everyone's going to listen. This podcast is brought to you by my agency, Cartology. We are a customized done-for-you service agency that helps brands win on Amazon. It is super complex selling on the Amazon Marketplace. We help simplify that for you. This podcast is also brought to you by Podcastify Me. They are a full-service podcast production company that designs podcasts around people who are paid for their advice. That is coaches. If you want someone to help create, strategize, and distribute your podcast to the masses, go to podcastify.me to find out more. I've so enjoyed that you've been a part of the conversation and that you've given of your time to hear these people's stories. We'd love for you to share. If you want to find out more, just go to thelongergame.com. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Stay blessed. And until next time, cheers.